The lobby of St. Jude's Memorial was dead silent, save for the rhythmic squeak-drag of Martha's orthopedic shoe against the linoleum. Dr. Sterling stood by the reception desk. His manicured finger pointed toward the automatic doors, his voice echoing with cruel authority. "We need efficiency here, not charity cases. You're a liability, Martha. Take your limp and go home." He thought he had won. He thought he was finally clearing out the dead weight of the ER. But Dr. Sterling didn't hear the low thrumming vibration shaking the glass windows yet. He didn't know that 3 miles out, 4 Black Hawk helicopters were cutting through the heavy Oregon fog, carrying a dying VIP and a squad of elite Marines. And they weren't coming for the chief of surgery. They were coming for Angel 6. St. Jude's Memorial Hospital was the kind of place that smelled of pine sol and old coffee. It sat on the edge of a mid-sized town in Oregon, serving a mix of loggers, retired mechanics, and the occasional lost tourist. For 20 years, the emergency room had been the domain of Martha O'Connell. Martha was 52, with graying hair usually wrestled into a messy bun, and a face that bore the map of 1,000 double shifts. And then there was the leg. Her right leg was braced in steel and leather, resulting in a distinct, uneven gait. Click-drag, click-drag. It was the heartbeat of the night shift. When the regulars old Mr. Henderson, with his asthma, or the wild Miller boys with their broken fingers, heard that sound, they relaxed. They knew Mother Martha was on the floor. But the hospital board didn't care about comfort. They cared about metrics. St. Jude's was bleeding money, and the board's solution arrived in a sleek silver Audi R8. His name was Dr. Richard Sterling. He was 40 years old, a hot-shot administrator from Chicago, with a jawline that could cut glass and a soul made of spreadsheets. He had been hired to trim the fat, and from the moment he walked into the ER, he decided that Martha O'Connell was the fattest part of it. "Nurse O'Connell," Sterling said on his 3rd day. He was standing by the nurse's station, holding a tablet like a shield. "I've been reviewing your file. Your patient turnover time is sluggish." Martha didn't look up from the chart she was annotating. "Mr. Davies has dementia, Dr. Sterling. He doesn't turn over. He needs someone to hold his hand while the sedative kicks in so he doesn't punch a tech. That takes 10 minutes. Sterling smirked a tight, humorless expression. 10 minutes we don't have. And frankly, he dropped his voice, leaning in, so the other nurses, Sarah and young Timothy, could hear. Watching you navigate the hallway is painful. In a trauma center, seconds count. You are physically incapable of moving at the speed this institution requires. The ER went quiet. Timothy, a fresh graduate who idolized Martha, looked down at his shoes. Martha slowly capped her pen. She turned to face him, shifting her weight off her bad leg. "I get where I need to be, doctor. I haven't lost a patient to speed yet." "Yet," Sterling said, tapping the tablet. "I'm putting you on desk duty. Triage only. I don't want you in the trauma bays. We need agility in there. Not whatever this is." He gestured vaguely at her leg. "You can't do that," Sarah whispered, her face red. "Martha runs the trauma bays. She knows the protocols better than the attendings. I am the chief of medicine nurse, Sarah. I can do whatever I please." Sterling straightened his tie. "Desk duty, O'Connell, or you can take early retirement. Your choice." Martha's eyes, usually warm and crinkled with laughter lines, turned to steel. It was a look that would have terrified men far harder than Richard Sterling had he known what to look for. "I'll take the desk," she said quietly. As Sterling walked away, feeling the rush of dominance, Martha sat heavily in the triage chair. She rubbed her thigh just above the brace where the deep, jagged scars of shrapnel lived under her scrubs. She didn't say a word. She just opened the logbook and started working. But the war between the limping nurse and the shiny doctor had just begun. 2 weeks passed. The atmosphere in the ER curdled. Sterling was obsessed with optics. He replaced the comfortable waiting room chairs with sleek, hard plastic ones because they looked modern. He cut the coffee budget for the break room, and he rode Martha relentlessly. Every time she stood up to help a patient to the restroom because the orderlies were busy, Sterling seemed to materialize from the shadows. "Sit down, O'Connell," he'd bark. "That is not your job. You are triage. You sit and you type. Let the able-bodied staff handle the movement." It was humiliating. Patients who had known Martha for decades watched with pity as she was scolded like a naughty child. One rainy Tuesday, a homeless veteran known as Sarge, real name Arthur Penn, stumbled in. Arthur was a regular. He had severe PTSD and a chronic foot infection that flared up when the weather turned. He was loud, belligerent, and smelled of cheap whiskey and rot. "I want Martha," Arthur screamed, swinging a crutch at a terrified security guard. "Get me Martha or I'll burn this whole place down." Dr. Sterling came storming out of his office. "Security, get this man out of here. We are a hospital, not a shelter for drunks." "He's septic. Look at his color," Martha shouted from the desk. She started to stand up. "Sit down." Sterling pointed a finger in her face. "Security, remove him." "No." Martha ignored the order. She moved. Click, drag. Click, drag. She moved faster than anyone expected, inserting herself between the burly security guard and the swinging crutch. "Arthur." Her voice wasn't loud, but it had a command tone that cut through the chaos like a knife. "Stand down, Marine." Arthur froze. The fog in his eyes cleared for a second. He looked at the woman with the limp. "Angel," he whispered. "It's me. Arthur. Drop the stick." He dropped the crutch. Martha guided him to a chair, ignoring the stench, and began checking his pulse. She had him calm and cooperative in 30 seconds. Sterling was apoplectic. He marched over, grabbing Martha's arm. "I gave you a direct order. You disobeyed protocol. You undermined my authority in front of staff and patients." Martha pulled her arm away. "I saved you a lawsuit, and I'm about to save his foot. He's going into room 3. "He is going to the county clinic," Sterling yelled. "And you are done." The entire ER stopped. Even the heart monitors seemed to beep quieter. "I have tolerated your insubordination and your physical limitations long enough." Sterling hissed, his face flushing red. "You are a relic, O'Connell. You limp around here like a wounded animal slowing us down. You are fired. Pack your locker. I want you off the premises in 1 hour." "You can't fire Martha," Timothy shouted, stepping forward. "She's the best nurse we have." "Another word and you'll join her in the unemployment line," Sterling snapped. He turned back to Martha. "Did you hear me? Step aside. Step aside and get out." Martha looked at him. For a moment she looked tired, infinitely tired. "You're making a mistake, Doctor. The only mistake was not doing this on day 1. Go." Martha nodded slowly. She took off her stethoscope, a battered black lit man that had seen more trauma than Sterling had seen in movies, and placed it gently on the desk. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply turned around. Click, drag. Click, drag. She walked toward the staff locker room at the back of the hospital. Dr. Sterling adjusted his cuffs, looking around the silent room. "Now, let's get back to work. We have metrics to meet." He checked his Rolex. It was 1400 hours. At 14:05, the phone at the main desk rang. It was the red phone, the direct line to emergency dispatch that was reserved for mass casualty events. Sarah picked it up, her hands shaking. She listened for 10 seconds, her face draining of all color. She dropped the phone and looked at Sterling. "Doctor, what is it?" "A bus crash?" Sterling asked, annoyed. "No," Sarah stammered. It's the Pentagon." Sterling laughed. "Excuse me." "A prank call." "No, sir. They said code black. They said inbound heavy transport. ETA 4 minutes. Code black." Sterling frowned. "That's not a civilian code." Then the coffee in the pot on the counter began to ripple. A low thumping sound started. It wasn't the sharp whop-whop of the local life flight helicopter. This was deeper, heavier. It was a sound that vibrated in the chest cavity. Sterling walked to the automatic doors and looked out into the grey parking lot. On the horizon, 4 dark shapes appeared flying low and fast in a phalanx formation. They weren't white and blue medical choppers. They were matte black and olive drab. "Marine 1 to base," a voice crackled over the radio at the nurse's station, surprisingly loud. "We have a priority 1 surgical emergency. Is the LZ secure?" Sterling froze. "What is happening?" The lead chopper banked hard, the downdraft sending dust and debris flying across the parking lot, triggering car alarms. It was a CH-53C Stallion, flanked by 3 Black Hawks. This was an invasion force. As the massive wheels of the lead chopper touched down, crushing the "Reserved for Chief of Medicine" sign, the side doors flew open. 6 Marines in full tactical gear jumped out, weapons at the low ready, scanning the perimeter. They weren't securing the hospital. They were securing the entrance. A man in a flight suit jumped out after them. He didn't look like a doctor. He looked like a panicked colonel. He ran toward the sliding doors where Sterling stood paralyzed. The colonel burst into the lobby, breathless. "Who is in charge here?" Sterling puffed out his chest, trying to regain his composure. "I am Dr. Richard Sterling, Chief of—" The colonel shoved past him, as if he were a cardboard cutout. "I don't care about your title. Where is she?" "Who?" Sterling asked, bewildered. "We were told she is at this facility," the colonel barked, scanning the room frantically. "We have a general with a jagged piece of shrapnel adjacent to the descending aorta. He's bleeding out. Our flight surgeon can't stabilize him. We need the specialist." I am a surgeon," Sterling stammered. "I can scrub in." The colonel turned on him, eyes blazing. No offense, Doc, but the general specifically requested the only person who has performed this extraction in the field and kept the patient alive. We tracked her NPI number to this dump." The colonel grabbed Sterling by the lapels. "Where is Angel 6? Sterling blinked. "Angel? Who?" "Captain Martha O'Connell." "Where the hell is she?" The silence that followed was louder than the helicopters outside. Every nurse, every orderly, and every patient turned to look at the swinging doors of the staff locker room. The doors pushed open. Martha stood there. She was wearing a floral coat and carrying a tote bag. She had her keys in her hand. She was leaving. The colonel released Sterling and dropped to one knee. In the middle of the lobby, surrounded by mud and blood, a full-bird colonel dropped to his knee. "Captain!" the colonel shouted over the roar of the engines. "We need you!" Martha looked at the colonel. Then she looked at Sterling, who was standing with his mouth open, pale as a sheet. "I'm sorry, Colonel," Martha said, her voice calm. "But I've just been ordered to step aside. I'm dead weight. I'm retired." The silence in the lobby was shattered by the colonel standing up. He was a large man, built like a linebacker with the name Harrison stitched onto his flight suit. He turned slowly toward Dr. Richard Sterling. The look on his face wasn't just anger. It was the cold, calculated look of a man who decided who lived and who died for a living. "You fired her?" Harrison asked. His voice was dangerously low. Sterling, realizing the gravity of the situation, but still clinging to his title, straightened his tie. "She was terminated for cause, insubordination and inability to perform physical duties. Now, if you have a patient, I am the chief surgeon." You can shut your mouth," Harrison snapped. He turned to the Marines guarding the door. "Sergeant Miller, secure the perimeter. No one leaves. If this civilian interferes, detain him." "Hoorah!" the sergeant grunted, stepping forward. Sterling gasped. "You can't do that. This is a private hospital." Harrison ignored him. He turned back to Martha, his demeanor softening instantly. "Captain O'Connell, please. It's Iron Mike. It's General Mitchell." Martha's hand, which was gripping her tote bag, tightened until her knuckles turned white. "Mike," she whispered. He's alive." "Barely," Harrison said urgently. "IED in Syria, a secondary blast, a fragment migrated. It's resting against the aortic arch. The field surgeons were too scared to touch it. They patched him and flew him straight here because Mike was conscious long enough to say one thing, 'Get me Angel 6. Martha closed her eyes. For a moment she wasn't in the sterile, hostile lobby of St. Jude's. She was back in the dust and heat of the sandbox. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of antiseptic, and opened her eyes. The fatigue vanished. The resignation vanished. "What's his vitals?" she asked. The voice wasn't the soft tone of the Mother Martha the nurses knew. It was sharp, clipped, and authoritative. "BP 80/50. Tachycardic at 130. Saturation dropping," Harrison rattled off. Martha dropped her tote bag on the floor. "Sarah," she barked. Sarah jumped, startled by the change in tone. "Yes, Martha." "Call the OR. Tell them to prep room 1. I need the vascular tray, the microforceps, the titanium ones, not the cheap steel ones Sterling bought, and I need 4 units of O-neg on the rapid infuser. Now." Sarah didn't look at Sterling. She didn't hesitate. "On it." She grabbed the phone. Martha turned to Timothy. "Tim, get a gurney to the helipad. You're with me." "Yes, ma'am." Timothy sprinted toward the doors. Martha took a step, her bad leg dragging, but she didn't stop. She looked at Sterling, who was watching his hospital get commandeered. "I need a first assist," she said coldly. Sterling scoffed. "You expect me to assist you?" "You're a nurse. I'm a board-certified surgeon. If anyone is operating, it's me." Martha stepped into his personal space. She was shorter than him, but in that moment she towered over him. "Dr. Sterling, that man out there is a 4-star general. If he dies because you have an ego problem, these Marines won't arrest you. They will dismantle your life. You are scrubbing in. You will hold the retractors. You will speak only when spoken to. Do you understand?" Sterling looked at the colonel, whose hand was resting on the sidearm holstered at his hip. He looked at the Marines. He looked at Martha's eyes burning with a fire he hadn't seen in 20 years of medicine. "Fine," Sterling choked out. "But if this goes wrong, it's on your license. What's left of it?" "If this goes wrong," Martha said, turning toward the trauma bay, "we won't have to worry about licenses." She began to walk. Click, drag. Click, drag. But this time, nobody heard a limp. They heard the march of a soldier going to war. The operating room was a flurry of controlled chaos. The hospital staff, usually sluggish under Sterling's micromanagement, moved with electric precision. They could feel the energy radiating off Martha. General Michael Mitchell lay on the table, intubated, his chest rising and falling in shallow, jagged rhythms. He was a mountain of a man, scarred and grey-haired, but looking terrifyingly fragile under the harsh OR lights. Martha stood at the sink, scrubbing her hands. The ritual was familiar. The smell of the iodine soap, the rough bristles of the brush. Sterling was at the next sink, scrubbing aggressively. "I hope you know the anatomy of the aortic arch has variances," he muttered. "If you nick the laryngeal nerve, he loses his voice. If you nick the aorta, he's dead in 3 seconds." "I know the anatomy, doctor," Martha said, rinsing her hands. "I wrote the field manual on thoracic extraction of foreign bodies under combat conditions in 2004. Sterling paused, foam dripping from his elbows. You wrote the protocol." "Chapter 4, Martha said, backing in. She entered the OR. A nurse helped her into the sterile gown. She snapped her gloves on. "Scalpel," she demanded. The instrument hit her hand. "Time out," she announced to the room. "Patient is General Michael Mitchell. Procedure is removal of migratory metallic fragment from the aortic arch. I am lead. Dr. Sterling is assist. Anesthesia, you keep him deep. If he bucks, we lose him." "Understood," the anesthesiologist said, eyes wide. Martha looked down at the chest. A jagged scar ran down the sternum, an old injury. She traced it with her gloved finger. "Hello, Mike," she whispered. "Let's get this out of you." She made the incision. For the next hour, the only sounds were the rhythmic beeping of the monitor and the snap of instruments. Martha didn't move fast. She moved with a fluid, terrifying economy. There was no wasted motion. Every cut was precise. Every clamp was deliberate. Sterling, holding the chest retractors, found himself mesmerized against his will. He had expected her to be clumsy to shake, but her hands were rock steady. The limp that defined her in the hallway didn't exist here. Here, standing over the patient, she was a statue. "I see it," Martha said softly. "Camera 2, zoom in." On the monitors, the image magnified. Buried deep in the mediastinum, pulsing with every beat of the heart, was a jagged piece of dark metal. It was resting directly against the aorta, the main artery carrying blood from the heart to the rest of the body. It was less than a millimeter from puncturing the wall. "My God," Sterling whispered. "It's practically touching the adventitia. You can't pull that. The friction alone will tear the artery." "I'm not going to pull it," Martha said. "I'm going to float it." "Float it?" Sterling asked. "That's impossible." "Irrigation," Martha ordered. "Warm saline, lots of it." She began to flood the chest cavity. Her hands moved into the wound, disappearing into the blood and water. "I need silence," she ordered. The room went deathly quiet. Martha closed her eyes for a split second, visualizing the jagged edges of the metal. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was Angel 6, the legend of the Kandahar Valley. She was the woman who had pulled men out of burning Humvees while taking fire. But as her fingers brushed the metal, a tremor ran through the floor. "BP dropping," anesthesia shouted. 60 over 40. "He's crashing. He's throwing a clot." Sterling panicked. "Abort, pack the chest and get him to ICU." "No," Martha snapped. "We pack him, he dies. The pressure will drive the shard into the aorta. He's dying right now, Sterling yelled. I am taking over. Give me the— Don't you touch him, Martha roared. It was a sound so primal it froze Sterling in place. Push Epi, she ordered, and get me the magnet. The magnet? The scrub nurse looked confused. The ophthalmic magnet. For eye surgery. Get it now. It was a desperate, insane gambit, using a magnet to manipulate a piece of shrapnel near the heart. It was unheard of. You're crazy, Sterling hissed. You'll rip it right through the vessel wall. It's not steel, Martha said. Her eyes locked on the wound. It's a fragment from a newer alloy casing. It's only weakly magnetic. I don't need to pull it out. I just need to lift it. 2 millimeters. The nurse ran in with the sterilized magnet. Martha took it. She hovered the device over the open chest cavity. Come on, Mike, she whispered. Work with me. She lowered the magnet. On the screen, the dark shard shuddered. BP 50/30. We are losing him. Anesthesia chanted like a grim countdown. Martha held her breath. She lowered the magnet another fraction of an inch. The shard moved. It lifted just a hair's breadth away from the pulsing artery wall. Gotcha, Martha whispered. With her other hand, she slid the forceps underneath the floating shard. She clamped down. Magnet off. She slowly, agonizingly, slowly, withdrew her hand. Sterling held his breath. The nurses leaned in. Martha pulled her hand out of the chest cavity. In the grip of the forceps was a twisted, ugly piece of black metal, no bigger than a fingernail. She dropped it into the metal kidney dish. Clang. Check the aorta, she said. Sterling peered into the cavity. The vessel wall was intact. There was no tear, no fountain of blood. It's clean, Sterling said, disbelief coloring his voice. How did you know? BP stabilizing sult, anesthesia announced, sounding relieved. 90/60, sinus rhythm returning. Martha exhaled a long, shuddering breath. She stepped back from the table. Close him up, doctor. I trust you can handle a standard sternal closure. Sterling looked at her. For the first time, there was no arrogance in his eyes, only shock. Yes, I can. Martha stripped off her gloves, her hands rock steady. Moments ago, began to tremble slightly as the adrenaline faded. She turned to walk out. Click, drag, click, drag. The sound returned. But this time, nobody in the room heard it as a weakness. It sounded like a victory lap. Martha sat in the locker room, her head in her hands. The adrenaline crash was hitting her hard. Her leg throbbed with a dull, sickening ache. It always hurt more after high stress. It was as if the injury remembered the fear. The door opened. It wasn't Sterling. It was Colonel Harrison. He walked in carrying 2 styrofoam cups of terrible hospital coffee. He handed one to her. Black 2 sugars, he said. Just how you liked it in the sandbox. Martha took the cup, her hands warming against the cheap foam. That was a long time ago, Harry. Harrison sat on the bench opposite her. Not for Mike. Not for me. We never forgot. He took a sip. You know, when the call came in, that Mike was hit, he was conscious. The medics were trying to load him onto the bird. He grabbed my collar. He was bleeding out, choking on his own blood, and he said, "Find O'Connell. Find Angel 6. She owes me a drink." Martha laughed, a dry, cracked sound. "He owes me a leg." Harrison smiled sadly. "That day, in the valley. I've read the report 1,000 times, but I never heard it from you." Martha stared into the black coffee. The white lockers faded away. The smell of pine sol was replaced by the smell of burning diesel and cordite. Flashback, Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. 12 years ago. The heat was oppressive. 115 degrees in the shade, and there was no shade. The forward operating base FOB was under heavy mortar fire. Captain Martha O'Connell was running the trauma tent. She was younger then, faster. She had 2 good legs and a future as a trauma surgeon waiting for her back in the States. "Incoming!" someone screamed. The ground shook. Dust rained down from the ceiling of the tent. Martha didn't flinch. She was clamping an artery on a young private who had stepped on a mine. "Stabilize him and get him on the bird," she yelled. Then the radio crackled. "Dust-off 2 is down. I repeat, Dust-off 2 is down 500 meters outside the wire." That was the medevac chopper. It had been hit by an RPG. Martha didn't wait for orders. She grabbed her medic bag and ran. She ran out of the tent into the blinding sun, toward the column of black smoke rising from the valley floor. "Captain, get back here!" the base commander yelled. She ignored him. She sprinted across the open ground bullets, kicking up puffs of dirt around her boots. She reached the crash site. The helicopter was a twisted wreck lying on its side. Flames were licking at the fuel tanks. She crawled inside the fuselage. The pilot was dead. The co-pilot was unconscious. In the back, a major was pinned under a heavy crate of ammo. It was Major Michael Mitchell. "Doc," he wheezed. "Get out! She's gonna blow." "Not without you, Major," Martha grunted, trying to heave the crate off him. It was too heavy. The fire was getting closer. The heat was searing her skin. "Go!" Mitchell yelled. "That's an order." "I don't take orders from patients," Martha snapped. She braced her back against the fuselage wall and pushed the crate with her legs. She screamed with effort. The crate moved just enough for Mitchell to slide his leg out. They scrambled out of the burning wreck. They were 10 feet away when the fuel tank cooked off. The explosion threw them through the air. Martha felt a slam like a sledgehammer against her right leg. She hit the ground hard. When she looked down, her leg was a ruin. A piece of the fuselage, jagged burning metal, had severed the muscle and shattered the bone. But Mitchell was alive. He crawled over to her, dragging her by her flak vest away from the fire. He took off his belt and cranked it around her thigh as a tourniquet. "I got you, Angel," he whispered. "I got you. Stay with me." She looked up at the sky, watching the other helicopters circle. Angel 1. Angel 2. She was the 6th medic on the ground. Angel 6. End flashback. Martha blinked, returning to the locker room. She rubbed the scar tissue through her scrubs. "I lost the leg," she said softly. "The army discharged me. Medical retirement. They gave me a medal and sent me home." "And you came here," Harrison said, "to this place." "I wanted to work," Martha said. "I wanted to be useful. But the world doesn't like a limping nurse, Harry. They see the brace and they think slow. They think liability." "They're idiots," Harrison growled. "Dr. Sterling. He isn't evil." Martha sighed. "He's just blind. He sees spreadsheets. He doesn't see people." "He saw you today," Harrison said. He stood up. "Mike is going to pull through. You know that, right? You saved him again." "I did my job." "No." Harrison shook his head. "You did the impossible. Again." There was a knock on the locker room door. It opened slowly. It was Timothy, the young nurse. He looked terrified. Martha, Captain O'Connell. Just Martha, Tim. It's Dr. Sterling. He wants everyone in the conference room. He said it's mandatory. Timothy looked at the colonel. He asked for you too, sir. Martha sighed and grabbed her cane. Here we go. The official firing. He's going to make a spectacle of it. Harrison adjusted his uniform. Let him try. They walked out of the locker room together. The colonel tall and imposing, and Martha limping with a rhythm that now sounded like a drumbeat of war. They headed toward the conference room. But as they walked down the hallway, Martha noticed something strange. The hospital was quiet. Too quiet. Where are the patients? She asked. Timothy didn't answer. He just pushed the double doors of the conference room open. Martha stepped inside and gasped. The conference room of St. Jude's Memorial was designed to hold 50 people. Today, it held nearly 100. Doctors, nurses, orderlies, and administration staff were packed shoulder to shoulder. Along the back wall, standing like statues made of granite and Kevlar, were the Marines of the general's detail. When Martha walked in, the room didn't just go quiet. It went still. It was the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious figures or royalty. Timothy, standing near the door, practically vibrated with pride. Dr. Sterling stood at the mahogany podium at the front of the room. He looked like a man trying to hold onto a cliff edge with greased fingers. His pristine white coat was rumpled, and there was a smear of dried blood on his cuff, a memento of the surgery he had just witnessed. Seated next to the podium was a man Martha recognized only from the portraits in the lobby, Mr. Arthur Galloway, the chairman of the hospital board. He was a small man with glasses, but he possessed the terrifying stillness of a corporate executioner. Please come in, Ms. O'Connell, Sterling said, his voice straining for a tone of benevolence. We were just debriefing. Martha limped to the front. She didn't sit. She stood leaning on her cane, facing the room. Colonel Harrison stood directly behind her, a silent guardian. Debriefing? Martha asked. Is that what we call it now? Sterling cleared his throat, shuffling his papers. I was just explaining to Chairman Galloway and the staff that today was a irregular but ultimately successful demonstration of our trauma capabilities. It was a high-pressure situation, and emotions ran high, but in the end, the system worked. He looked at Martha with a tight, desperate smile. And I was just about to announce that in light of your unique contribution today, I am willing to rescind your termination. You may return to your triage duties effective immediately. We can overlook the insubordination as a heat-of-the-moment error. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room. Sarah, the nurse, audibly scoffed. Rescind my termination, Martha repeated slowly. You fired me because I limp. You fired me because I'm dead weight. Now let's not get into semantics. Sterling waved a hand dismissively. The point is, we are a team, and I am willing to be the bigger man. Excuse me, a voice cut through the air. It was Colonel Harrison. Sterling froze. Colonel, this is an internal hospital staff meeting. And that, Harrison pointed toward the recovery wing, is a United States general, which makes this a matter of national security interest. Harrison stepped forward, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. Dr. Sterling, you seem to be under the impression that Nurse O'Connell merely assisted you. I was the lead surgeon, Sterling insisted, sweating now. I closed the chest. You held the retractors, Harrison corrected, his voice booming. We have the helmet cam footage from the scrub tech. We record all field surgeries on high-value targets. The board has already seen it. Sterling whipped his head around to look at Mr. Galloway. The chairman pushed his glasses up his nose. "It was quite illuminating, Richard," Galloway said, his voice dry as dust. "Especially the part where you wanted to pack the chest and abandon the patient, and Ms. O'Connell overruled you to save his life." "That was a clinical disagreement," Sterling protested. "And then," Galloway continued, ignoring him, "there is the matter of the logs. I pulled the HR files while you were scrubbing out." He picked up a file folder. Systematic harassment, age discrimination, and today wrongful termination of a decorated veteran based on a service-connected disability. Galloway stood up. "St. Jude's Memorial was founded on the principles of care and compassion, Doctor, not metrics, not speed." "I saved this hospital money," Sterling shouted, his composure finally cracking. "I cut the fat, I made us efficient. You cut the heart out of this place," Martha said quietly. Sterling sneered at her. You are the heart. You're a cripple, O'Connell. You're slow. You're a liability. Just because you got lucky with a magnet trick doesn't change the fact that you can't run a code. You can't keep up. She doesn't have to run." A deep, raspy voice came from the speakerphone on the conference table. The room gasped. "General," Harrison asked, leaning toward the phone. "Put me on speaker, Harry." The voice of General Michael Mitchell rasped. He sounded weak, groggy, but undeniably alive. "You're on, sir," Harrison said. "Dr. Sterling." The general's voice filled the silent room. "You asked who I was. You know I'm a general. But you didn't check who funds your trauma center." Sterling went pale. I don't follow." "The Mitchell Family Foundation," the general wheezed. "My grandfather built this hospital. My father built the West Wing, and I sit on the steering committee that approves the annual budget." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Sterling looked at Galloway. Galloway just nodded. "I came to St. Jude's specifically," the general continued, "not just because of the location, but because I knew Martha O'Connell was there. I knew that if I was dying, she was the only one I wanted standing over me. I don't care if she limps. I don't care if she crawls. That woman has more medicine in her pinky finger than you have in your entire Ivy League body." "Sir, Sterling stammered. "You're fired, son," the general said. "Effective immediately. Get him out of my hospital." Galloway looked at the two security guards, the same ones Sterling had ordered to throw Martha out earlier. "You heard the general. Escort Dr. Sterling to his office to collect his personal effects. Then remove him." The guards didn't hesitate. They stepped forward, flanking Sterling. "This is illegal, I'll sue," Sterling screamed as they grabbed his arms. "Save it for the judge," the guard muttered, dragging him toward the door. As Sterling was hauled out, kicking and shouting, the room erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar. Nurses were crying, high-fiving. Timothy was hugging Sarah. Martha stood in the center of it all, leaning on her cane. She didn't smile. She just lowered her head and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 6 months. Colonel Harrison placed a hand on her shoulder. "Orders Angel 6. Martha looked up, her eyes wet. "Coffee," she said, "and tell the general to get some sleep." 3 days after the surgery that shook the foundations of St. Jude's Memorial, the relentless Oregon rain finally broke. The heavy gray clouds that had choked the valley for weeks dissolved, leaving behind a sky of piercing, brilliant blue. It was the kind of morning that made the wet asphalt of the parking lot, steam, and the pine trees surrounding the hospital glitter with melting frost. Inside the hospital, the change in atmosphere was even more palpable than the weather. For months, the corridors had felt like a submarine, running on emergency power, tight, anxious, and suffocating. Dr. Sterling's tenure had been a reign of terror defined by silence and averted eyes. But today the air was different. It was lighter. People were breathing again. Martha O'Connell arrived for her shift at 700 hours. She parked her old sedan in her usual spot, the one furthest from the door, leaving the closer spots for the patients, despite the ache in her right leg. As she walked toward the automatic doors, she saw a maintenance crew working on the reserved parking signs. One of the workers, a burly man named Frank, who had been treated by Martha for a slipped disc 2 years prior, was unscrewing the sign that read, "Reserved Chief of Medicine, Dr. R. Sterling." Frank saw Martha approaching. He paused his drill, whining to a halt. He tipped his hard hat. "Morning, Martha. Just taking out the trash." Martha smiled, a genuine expression that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Morning, Frank. Make sure the new screws are tight." She entered the lobby. Usually this was the hardest part of her day, the long walk across the linoleum, where the squeak drag of her orthopedic shoe announced her arrival to everyone. For months, that sound had been a beacon for Sterling's mockery. Today, as the sound echoed off the walls, the receptionist, a young woman named Jessica, stood up. "Good morning, Martha. I have your coffee ready. Black 2 sugars. Martha paused, leaning on her cane. "You didn't have to do that, Jess. I wanted to—" Jessica beamed. "Timothy told us what happened in the OR. He said you were a Jedi." Martha chuckled, shaking her head. "Timothy watches too many movies. I just did my job." As she made her way to the elevators, she noticed the difference in how the staff looked at her. It wasn't the pity she was used to, the sideways glances at her heavy brace, the sympathy for the limping nurse. It was respect. Orderlies nodded. A resident held the elevator door open and waited for her to fully enter before pressing the button. The brace hadn't changed. Her gait hadn't changed. But the hospital finally understood that the limp wasn't a defect. It was a battle scar. Her first stop wasn't the ER, but the VIP recovery wing on the 4th floor. 2 Marines stood guard outside room 401. They weren't the same men from the initial assault force. These were dressed in service alphas, immaculate and intimidating. As Martha approached, they didn't just step aside. They snapped to attention, their movements perfectly synchronized. "Ma'am," the corporal on the left said, holding the door. "At ease, boys," Martha said softly, stepping into the room. General Michael "Iron Mike" Mitchell was sitting upright in the bed, looking significantly less grey than he had 3 days ago. He was surrounded by a fortress of pillows and was currently frowning at a plastic cup of green gelatin. Sitting in the armchair next to him was Arthur Galloway, the chairman of the board. The tension in the room was thick, but it wasn't hostile. It was the tension of high-stakes negotiation. "Martha." Mitchell's face lit up. He pushed the gelatin away with disdain. "Thank God. Tell Galloway that if he tries to feed me this radioactive sludge again, I'm calling in an airstrike on the cafeteria." "It's Lyme General," Galloway said with a long-suffering sigh. He looked up at Martha, and his expression shifted to one of profound, almost desperate seriousness. "Ms. O'Connell, thank you for joining us." Martha hooked her cane on the footboard of the bed and checked the monitors. "Heart rate 72, BP 110 over 70. You're doing well, Mike, for a man who had a magnet in his chest 72 hours ago." "I'm ready to leave," Mitchell grunted, "but Arthur here keeps talking about optics and staff restructuring." Galloway cleared his throat, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. "Yes, about that. Martha, we have been reviewing the incident and the personnel files. It has become abundantly clear that the board was misled us by Dr. Sterling regarding the definition of competency in this hospital. He paused, adjusting his glasses. Sterling is gone. The legal team is currently negotiating his severance, which, given the General's testimony regarding gross negligence, will likely be 0. But that leaves a vacuum. Martha crossed her arms. She knew what was coming. We want you to take the role of Chief Nursing Officer, Galloway said. We need someone with experience, someone the staff respects. The salary is triple what you're making now. You'd have an office, a staff, and no physical labor. You could get off the floor. Rest your leg. It was the golden ticket. It was the exit strategy every older nurse dreamed of. No more 12-hour shifts on concrete floors, no more lifting heavy patients, no more bodily fluids, just memos, meetings, and air conditioning. Martha looked at the General. Mitchell watched her carefully, his blue eyes sharp. He didn't say a word. He let her choose. Martha looked down at her leg. She felt the heavy steel of the brace through her scrub pants. Then she looked out the window at the helipad, where the life flight had just touched down. She saw the team rushing out, Timothy, Sarah, and the new intern struggling to offload a stretcher. No, Martha said. Galloway blinked. I beg your pardon. It's a substantial offer, Ms. O'Connell. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Galloway, I really do, and God knows my bank account could use the help. But I'm not an administrator. You could run this place, Galloway insisted. I don't want to run the place, Martha said firmly. I want to work in it. Dr. Sterling's problem wasn't just his ego. It was that he forgot what it felt like to hold a dying man's hand. He forgot the smell of the trauma bay. If I go up to the C-suite in 5 years, I'll be just like him. Maybe nicer, but just as blind. Then what do you want? Galloway asked, exasperated. We cannot have a national hero working triage and getting yelled at by drunks. I want to teach, Martha said. I want a new title. Director of Trauma Training. I want authority over the residency program's trauma rotation. Every intern, every nurse, every attending surgeon has to go through my course. I want to teach them how to handle the things that aren't in the textbooks. I want to teach them how to think when the protocol fails. Galloway looked at Mitchell. The General grinned. She's right, Arthur. You have plenty of bureaucrats. You don't have enough warriors. Galloway sighed, then a small smile appeared on his lips. Director of Trauma Training. And a 50% raise. Double, Martha countered, and a new coffee machine for the break room. The industrial kind. Italian. Galloway laughed, extending his hand. Done. After Galloway left to process the paperwork, the room fell quiet. The hum of the oxygen regulator filled the silence. You played him like a fiddle, Mitchell murmured. He needed playing, Martha said, sitting in the chair Galloway had vacated. She rubbed her knee. So, Mike, when do you ship out? Walter Reed is sending a transport tomorrow, Mitchell said. He shifted, wincing slightly as the incision pulled. But before I go, I have unfinished business. He reached for the bedside table, picking up a small black velvet box. He held it for a moment, his thumb tracing the seam. You know, Mitchell said, his voice dropping to a lower, rougher timbre. For 12 years I wondered if I did the right thing, dragging you out of that chopper. I saw your leg, I saw the blood. I thought maybe I should have left you. Maybe you would have been better off not surviving just to live in pain. Martha froze. Mike, don't say that. I mean it. He continued, looking at her with intense vulnerability. I watched you these last few days. I saw the way you walk. I know it hurts. Every step. I felt guilty, Martha. I felt like I stole your life. You didn't steal my life, Martha said fiercely. You gave it back to me. Yes, it hurts. Some days it hurts like hell. But do you know how many people I've saved in 12 years? How many mothers went home to their kids because I was there? If I had died in that valley, they would have died too. She leaned forward, resting her hand on his arm. My leg is the price I paid for the seat at the table, Mike. And I'd pay it again. Mitchell nodded slowly, blinking back moisture in his eyes. He handed her the box. Open it. Martha opened the lid. Inside, resting on white satin, was not a standard military decoration. It was a custom-made tactical patch. The embroidery was exquisite gold and black thread depicting a pair of angel wings, but the feathers were shaped like surgical scalpels. In the center was the number 6. The unit had it made, Mitchell said. Technically, it's against regulation to wear non-standard insignia, but I'm a 4-star general, so I'm making it a regulation. Angel 6. That was your call sign in the dust. It belongs to you. It's beautiful, Martha whispered, running her finger over the threads. It's a warning, Mitchell corrected with a smirk. So the next time some hotshot doctor tries to order you around, you can just point to the shoulder. Martha laughed, wiping a tear from her cheek. She took the patch out. It had a heavy Velcro backing. She pressed it onto the shoulder of her blue scrub top. It stuck with a firm rip snap. Thank you, Mike. Suddenly, the hospital pager at her waist beeped. It wasn't a routine summons. It was the triple tone of a mass casualty alert. Code red, Trauma Bay 1 and 2, logging truck rollover, multiple crush injuries, 5 minutes out. Martha grabbed her cane and stood up. The fatigue in her face vanished, replaced by the sharp, predatory focus of a combat medic. Go, Mitchell said, leaning back into his pillows. Give 'em hell, Angel. Get some sleep, General, she ordered. Martha walked out of the room. As she hit the hallway, she didn't walk. She marched. Click, drag, click, drag. She reached the ER just as the paramedics burst through the double doors. The scene was chaotic. A young logger was on the gurney, his leg mangled, blood soaking through the sheets. 2 interns were freezing up, staring at the gore. I can't find the femoral artery, one intern shouted, panic rising in his voice. There's too much tissue damage. He's bleeding out, the nurse cried. The doors swung open wider. Martha stepped in, the room seemed to shrink around her. Step aside. Martha didn't shout, but her voice cut through the noise like a whip. She moved to the head of the gurney. She looked at the terrified intern. Doctor, look at me. The intern looked up, eyes wide. Stop looking at the blood, Martha commanded. Look at the anatomy. The landmark is the inguinal ligament. Find the hip bone. Go 2 inches medial. I can't feel it, the intern stammered. Martha didn't take over. She didn't push him away. She reached out and grabbed his hand, guiding it firmly into the bloody mess of the wound. Right there. Press. Put your weight into it. The intern pushed. The fountain of blood slowed, then stopped. I got it, the intern gasped. I have the pulse. Good, Martha said calmly. Now clamp it. Timothy start 2 large-bore IVs. Sarah call the OR and tell them we have a crush injury coming up. We need the vascular team. She looked around the room. The panic had evaporated. The team was moving. They were working. They were following the rhythm she set. Martha stood at the foot of the bed, her hand resting on her cane. the golden wings on her shoulder catching the harsh fluorescent light. She wasn't just a nurse with a bad leg anymore. She was the anchor. She was the storm wall. Dr. Sterling was gone, washed away like the rain. But Martha O'Connell was still here, and as she watched the intern stabilize the patient, she knew that St. Jude's was finally safe. Martha O'Connell proved that true strength isn't about how fast you can run. It's about standing your ground when everyone else runs away. She taught an arrogant doctor and an entire hospital system that you never judge a warrior by their scars. Dr. Sterling looked at a limp and saw a liability. General Mitchell looked at the same limp and saw a legend who walked through fire. In a world obsessed with efficiency, Martha reminded us that experience, loyalty, and heart are the only metrics that truly save lives. If you believe that our veterans and experienced nurses deserve more respect, then they hit that like button. Share this video to honor the Angel 6 in your life, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice and redemption. See you in the next video.